Just just give us one more minute. Okay. And everyone can see my screen okay? Okay, perfect. How's everyone doing tonight? Feel free to drop in the chat your location. If you're at a high school, let us know which area, state. We're expecting quite a few folks from California too. All right, well, let's get started. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. My name is Corinne Smith. I am the head of digital experiences at Uprooted Academy. We offer monthly webinars for students, counselors, and families on various aspects of the college application journey. And tonight we will have a financial aid 101 workshop with a representative, Maria Sanchez from UCLA. But before we jump into our workshop, oh, got a few more people, which is awesome. Before we jump into our workshop, I'd just like to explain a little bit more about Uprooted Academy. We started 3 years ago in 2021, and our mission is to empower low-income first-generation students of color by providing free resources to excel in the college application process, connect with careers, and narrow the wealth gap and promote mental wellness strategies for future success. As many studies have shown, students experience high anxiety and stress during this season of the application process after the application has been submitted and while waiting for acceptances. So we at Uprooted Academy, we are aiming to reduce that anxiety with the college application process, in addition to building a college access platform that we are anticipating in launching next January 2025. In addition to that, as I mentioned, we offer monthly webinars for students, families, and counselors. We also specifically have professional development training for high school counselors. Those are free online. Please check our events calendar, which I'll link at the end of our session today for upcoming sessions. In addition to that, we offer student and parent workshops and in-school direct student support for college readiness curriculum, specifically in person, led by my colleague here, Kayla Bailey, who is head of programs and partnerships, has been doing some in-person direct support in Los Angeles County. And coming up on March 15th, I believe, we will have our career major and career discovery fair, where students, families, and counselors can listen in on professionals from various industries and learn more about their trajectory in their career and the various majors that they majored in order to begin their careers. And just a little bit about our speaker today, Maria Sanchez. Maria is a first generation higher education advocate and currently leads as the Outreach and Communications Supervisor at UCLA Financial Aid and Scholarships. Her journey in financial aid began as a UCLA undergraduate peer advisor in 2017, where she studied sociology with a minor in education studies. After graduating in 2019, she advanced through roles including financial aid advisor and outreach communications coordinator, later earning her master's in education and educational counseling from USC in 2022. Fight on. Her experience extends to academic counseling and program coordination for UCLA's computational and systems biology IDP. At the core of Maria's work is an unwavering commitment to supporting college students, particularly those from marginalized communities, in successfully navigating their educational journeys. She focuses on community outreach initiatives that empower students with essential skills and knowledge for degree completion and career exploration. As a dedicated advocate for low-income, first-generation students of color, life's mission is to ensure higher education remains an accessible option for all students, regardless of their educational stage or background. So with that, I will now hand it over to Maria.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Corinne. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight or today, depending on the time. I'm super excited to be here and thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to ensure that we're really mindful of time because I know we're a little limited. So I do ask that if you have any questions, please reserve them till the end. I promise we will dedicate some time to answer all of that. And then I don't plan to share these slides just because of information that's specific to UCLA, and a lot of information can change within a week, within a month, especially right now with everything going on with the FAFSA process. But I'm happy to share a lot of the helpful links that I'm going to discuss throughout the presentation. So with that being said, this presentation is going to focus on how you can finance your UC higher education. Because I do represent our UCLA financial aid and scholarships, you'll notice that a lot of this information does highlight UCLA information, but a lot of it will be applicable to other institutions within the UC sector, as well as just applying for college as well. Alrighty then. So some of the topics I'll discuss is some background information, specifically regarding the recent changes with the FAFSA simplification process. We'll discuss the financial aid calendar. So I know we may have some seniors or counselors who are working closely with their seniors in preparation for the upcoming school year. So we want to ensure that you know those important deadlines and the applications that you would need to complete. We're going to discuss the partnership approach and how important that is once you're at an institution. We're going to discuss the cost of attendance, and this is probably where I'll really focus and dive into breaking down the different components in a budget for students, because I think this is the area that is most misinterpreted when it comes to financing your college education. We'll discuss some gift aid versus self-help aid, so really identifying what that means and what that encompasses, which will kind of go into the sources and types of aid that we offer within UCLA and the UC system. Maintaining financial aid eligibility, I think this is one of the most important topics, because we always just think about how do I apply for financial aid? How am I eligible? And I think we sometimes forget about maintaining that eligibility and what you need to do to ensure that. We'll discuss some scholarship tips, and then I'll end it off with a net price calculator. So a helpful tool that majority, if not all, college financial aid departments tend to offer as you prepare to make your decision on which college you would like to pursue. Alrighty. So some background information in this past academic year, so it would have been in 2023, about in December, there was some recent changes that were implemented, and that was with the Future Act and FAFSA Simplification Act. So with the Future Act, that enhanced the FAFSA experience by allowing the U.S. Department of Education to automatically obtain federal tax information on behalf of the student and their contributors directly from the IRS. So this was specifically for students and contributors who did give consent, since that is something that is also now required within the FAFSA application. On the other hand, when we're looking at the FAFSA Simplification Act, this expanded access to federal student aid and introduced significant changes to the application itself, not just in terms of the questions. So it did reduce the size of or number of questions significantly, but it also really kind of eased the process for a lot of students and families on how to import their information, and as well as, of course, the eligibility calculation, and it kind of allowed more students within the middle class family to be eligible for additional financial aid. Alrighty, so the first step to being eligible for financial aid. So that's going to be either applying for the FAFSA or the California Dream Act. So the biggest takeaway here is that you only have to do one of these applications, and that's going to be based on your student's citizenship status. So if you are a U.S. citizen or legal resident, then you would be completing the FAFSA application. If you are not a U.S. citizen or legal resident, but you may be eligible for AB 540, which does have a bit of criteria by institution, but majority of that is when you're graduating from a California high school or community college, you may be eligible for the California Dream Act. Now, the biggest other thing here is that both of these applications open October 1st. As we know, we already are well past October 1st. So unfortunately, there has been a delay for the 25-26 application. And so as of now, we've been notified that these applications don't anticipate to open until December 1st. So I would highly make a note. I would highly advise that you make a note of that. So for the 25-26 application, you will be able to access that hopefully December 1st. If there is a further delay beyond December 1st, you want to check on your respective financial aid department's website or just federal student aids who administers the application, and they'll notify students and institutions regarding those delays. For UCLA specifically, or the UC system in general, and majority of institutions, that priority filing deadline is going to be March 2nd. Now, I really want to highlight something that is important regarding that March 2nd deadline. So that application is due by 11:59 p.m. on March 2nd, but it is Eastern time. So that means for us, we need to make sure that our students are submitting it by, 8 or 9:59 p.m. to ensure that you're considered on time. So I would not advise that you wait until the day of. If the application does open December 1st, that gives you ample time. So 3 months about 3 months to fully complete that application, which hopefully will only take you anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes to complete. So I always recommend that students try to complete that as soon as possible. I also want to clarify, because this is also a big misconception around financial aid, is that if, let's say, a student who submits the application the day it opens versus a week before it closes, or not closes, but a week before March 2nd, doesn't mean that you're not going to be eligible for the same amount. It's just we want to ensure that students are completing their application on time. So regardless of when you submit that application, as long as it's before the priority deadline, you're going to be eligible for the maximum amount of financial aid. Alrighty, so just a little bit of insight into the FAFSA form, since I know we're going to have a lot of new filers in here. So some key changes that were implemented in this last application period. So everyone is required to have a studentaid.gov account. And so that means that you as a student are required to sign up and create an account. And you want to make a note of that username and password, because you're going to be utilizing that for the 2 or 4 years that you're pursuing your undergraduate degree, as well as eventually your master's, your PhD, and so forth. And so every student and contributor will need to create their own account. And to log into their account, what they call it is an FSA ID. So make sure to make a note of that. I do also want to highlight that for the FAFSA, this is only open to U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen students in terms of federal funding. All right, this is a good slide I would recommend taking a picture of or a screenshot, which you're more than welcome to with any of this information that I'm sharing. And at the end, if you did need any screenshots of the previous slides, I'm happy to go back for that. So steps for the FAFSA application form. Once you've created your account, you've started the application, these are the steps you're going to take in order to invite your contributor. So your contributor could be your parent. That's going to be whether it's a legal guardian my apologies. I should say, like, let's say you were adopted and they are considered your parents. Any legal guardianship is going to be treated a little bit differently. So if anyone is in a situation like that, we can discuss that at the very end for a little bit further guidance. The application does a really good job of taking you through the process of how to identify who should be considered a contributor. So we do understand that there's a lot of different scenarios that students might be in, which makes it a little bit difficult to identify who a contributor would be. So once you start the application, you'll invite your contributor by sending them an email. And so it is I'll walk you through the steps of the information you're gonna have to submit. So once they receive that email, they'll create their studentaid.gov account if they haven't done so already. They'll log in and that'll be with the same FSA ID and password that they created. Even if, let's say, you have a sibling who's already in college, they've been going to college for the past 3 years, your parent would use that same information that they use for your sibling's account. They're going to review their information about completing the section of the FAFSA form, and they'll provide the required information, including consent and approval. And of course, the student would then sign the form. Now, it's really, really critical because it does show up throughout the application in multiple places that the contributor and the student have to give consent and approval in order for that direct data exchange to occur. So remember in the beginning, I talked about how with the new act that was implemented, it allowed for that direct data exchange from the IRS. So students and parents didn't have to manually input all that tax information. And another important note, because I know this comes up a lot in the household in terms of financial responsibility. So by your parent giving consent for that tax information to be retrieved directly from the IRS, they are not held responsible to pay for your education. The purposes of obtaining that information is to be able to identify your eligibility for certain funding sources from the federal government, from the state, and then of course from your institution. Alrighty, so what do you need to know? So students or parents' answers on the FAFSA form will help determine which contributors, if any, will be required to provide information. The reason it says if any is because there are unique cases where a student will be identified as independent status. Just as some examples, let's say a student is considered a former or current foster youth, if they were a ward of the court or an illegal guardianship. In those cases, they are special circumstances that would allow the student to be identified as independent. And so in that case, parental tax information would not be required. Going into the second component here, students or parents invite contributors to complete their portion of the FAFSA form by entering the contributor's name, their date of birth, and social security number, if applicable, which we do understand there are some students who are in a mixed status family or in a mixed family status. And so I'll discuss that in the next slide about those additional steps that you may need to take. And then of course, you'll also include an email address. So all this information has to match exactly as your contributor's account information. So if let's say, this is your first time applying for financial aid, I highly recommend that you do this together at the same time. That way, when you're creating your parents' account, it's going to match exactly as the information that you're putting to invite them as a contributor. It's happened before where a student maybe forgot a parent's second last name, maybe it's a different address, even just one letter off on the name can prevent that invite from sending out to the parent. And then lastly, contributors must provide, again, personal and financial information in their own sections of the FAFSA form, but that doesn't make them financially responsible for the student's educational cost. All right, so in the case that your parent or one of your parents does not have an SSN or your contributor, on the invite parents section of the FAFSA form, there's going to be a box that you'll click, my parent does not have an SSN number. And so students will then enter their parent's address. We do not recommend that you submit the individual taxpayer identification number, also referred to as an ITIN, as that's going to kind of create confusion in the application. And that was one of the biggest glitches last year on the application that prevented students and families from moving forward in the application. So just leave that blank. The parent will then log into their studentaid.gov account with their username and password, and the online FAFSA form experience will be exactly the same as for someone who does have an SSN. Alrighty, so now looking into more about the partnership approach. So we just want to highlight that wherever you decide to attend, whether it's UCLA, whether it's a Cal State, you really want to ensure that you know where your financial aid department is, because you're going to have to create that partnership. As a reminder, you have to apply for financial aid on a yearly basis. And in some cases, depending on the situation, maybe your finances have changed, or your eligibility change due to your financial income, we want to ensure that you know who you need to contact to have that conversation about what resources you have accessible. So financing a college education entails a partnership between the student, parents or guardians, the federal and state governments, and of course, the college or university that you decide to attend. Alrighty, so this is where I'm really going to break down everything. So please take notes. And I do have a budget template at the very end that I'll share with Corinne to go ahead and email out to everyone. That way you can really understand how to create your own budget for yourself as you prepare to attend your university. So when it comes to awarding a student financial aid, the first step for us is, of course, to obtain that information from your FAFSA or California Dream Act. But then we assign you a budget, and that budget is going to be based on your housing selection. At least for UCLA, we do have 3 different budgets that we look at. We have on campus, so that's anyone who's living in the dorms. Off campus, that's anyone living in a university-owned or non-university-owned apartment. And then we have a commuter status. So that's anyone who's living at home with their family or relatives, a sibling, a cousin. And so each specific budget is a bit different in cost, just because we understand that it is a bit more expensive for someone living on campus versus someone living at home. However, we do account for all of the same expenses within the budget. So for instance, at UCLA, we have an example budget here of an on-campus student because this is probably our most prominent budget used for our incoming first-year students. Now, the first thing I always say right off the bat, because I know you're probably looking at that $41,942, is this is not your bill, okay? This is just your budget for us to ensure that we're providing sufficient funding to cover those expenses in case you have them. So I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit more. Now, some of these expenses are fixed, and what that means is that the university has to bill you for those expenses in order to attend the university. Now, other expenses are going to be variable, meaning that you may potentially have those. Those are going to be on a case-by-case basis. But again, what we include on the budget is just an estimate in case you have those. So in terms of fixed costs, using, again, an on-campus cost of attendance budget here is tuition and fees. Of course, the university is going to have to bill you for that in order to attend, and that's going to cover the full cost of your tuition and fees for the entire academic year. For UCLA specifically, we are a quarter system. Of course, that may be a little bit different depending on your institution that you're looking at. And we have 3 required quarters, so fall, winter, and spring. Summer is an optional term, and that's its own complete different budget and awarding process. The second fixed cost is going to be food and housing for an on-campus student. And so that means that the university will bill the student directly for that expense. Now, the figure that you see listed here is just an estimate because that's on average what a student might spend for food and housing. The actual cost that you would want to use is based on the contract that you sign directly with UCLA Housing or whatever institution's housing department. The third fixed cost here is health insurance. So every student is required to be covered through some form of health insurance that the university or University of California in this case indicates is sufficient coverage. Now, if a student has their own coverage and it does meet the criteria set by the institution, they can waive out of that cost. And so you don't have to pay for that expense. Everything else that we see listed here, so personal and transportation expenses, books, course materials, supplies, and equipment, those are just estimates. The university will not bill you directly for that. So right off the bat, that's already what, about $4,600. That's not even going to be billed directly. So you'll notice that in reality, what you're paying versus the budget could be significantly less. And again, that's not even accounting for financial aid that we're going to discuss. Another thing to also keep in mind is that institutions do have non-resident supplemental tuition cost for anyone who's out of state. And so for UCLA specifically, that cost is an additional $34,200 on top of the tuition and fees that we see listed here. Alrighty, so building a budget. I cannot emphasize how important it is as a student, especially as a first year, to create your own budget, to learn how to do that. And so again, I'll provide a resource or a tool that Corinne can share with everyone to kind of manage their own budget and kind of see what that looks like. So I always advise that students look at what their fixed costs are going to be. So we just kind of broke that down, right? Let's say I'm a student, I'm going to start at UCLA, and I know I'm going to actually live off campus. I decided I'm not going to live on campus. So right off the bat, I know the university is going to charge me for tuition, right? So I want to account for that. I have to pay rent, but maybe I found something affordable because I'm living with roommates. So my portion of the budget to pay for rent is only $500 a month. So then I want to account for that. I also want to account for any utilities that maybe I'm paying for, any personal expenses, let's say my phone bill. If I decided to have a car on campus, a quarterly permit, right? Just gas on average, what I might spend. Those are all things that you want to account for in advance to ensure that you have sufficient funding based on what you were provided. I also do recommend that you kind of track your spending, especially in your first quarter as you're acclimating to your institution. You want to kind of see what patterns you see about spending. So maybe you learn that every month you have to pay for printing or something like that. But I will say there's a lot of resources on campus, so hopefully you will not be doing that. So take advantage. But all those little expenses you want to account for. Then you'll look at what am I receiving in terms of financial aid? So any grant-based funding, right? Anything from the federal government, anything from the state, from the institution. Once you kind of create your budget, you can look at, based on what I'm receiving in grant-based aid, is this going to be sufficient to cover my expenses per quarter or per semester or per month? Or will I need to take out a loan? Will I have to work part-time? And so it's really critical that you start to learn how to do that in advance, because sometimes students just kind of see a big refund check and they just spend it all at once without thinking about, well, I need a budget for the quarter, right? I need to ensure that I'm going to have money that I'm going to have to pay for rent in 2 months from now, or whatever the case is. All right. So this is just kind of a visual of what I just mentioned. So once you create your budget, so your total cost of attendance, you'll subtract any gift aid, so any grants or scholarships, and that's going to give you your net cost. And so that's basically what you either have to pay out of pocket or through potentially federal or institutional loan assistance. All right, so student aid index. This is some new terminology that was introduced in the last academic year. And so I kind of want to break this down because I know it can be a bit confusing for students and families. So in previous years, we used to use a term called expected family contribution, or EFC. And so it was a big confusion for students and families, because when you read that, you look at, oh, that's what I'm going to have to pay for college, right? So that's not necessarily the case. That's not what this figure represents. So the EFC is now called the Student Aid Index, or SAI. And just to kind of put it short, what that tool is, it's used to determine your need-based eligibility for funding. And so in this new academic year and new application process, it now allows your student aid index to go down to a negative number of up to negative 1,500. So before we didn't have that. It was either 0 or a positive figure. So now it does allow a student's family financial calculation to go down to negative 1,500. And the way that institutions use this figure, especially when it comes to the negative 1,500 up to 0, is that it allows us to identify our most financially vulnerable student populations. And so let's say we got a funding to support additional students who really needed additional resources, right? By looking at that SAI, we can identify who's going to need that more than anyone when it comes to financial aid recipients. So when we're calculating students' financial aid eligibility, and let's say they have a negative 1,500 or negative 1,200, when we're actually calculating regular financial aid just for the academic year, we'll use 0, because that's basically what it's indicating, is that there's no contribution that can really occur to that student's financial aid package. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but I'll answer questions at the end in case we do need some clarification on that. All right, so gift aid versus self-help aid. So gift aid basically encompasses grants and scholarships, whether that was provided through your institution, through a local organization. So that typically is need and merit-based aid that does not need to be repaid. Of course, assuming that you're enrolled and you're meeting your academic requirements. This is federal, state, and institutional level funding that's available, which we're going to dive even a little bit more into. On the other hand, there's also self-help aid. And so every student's financial aid package is going to have this form of funding. And so typically that's going to encompass work study and federal or state or institutional loans. So federal work study, we'll dive a little bit more into that, but that basically allows you to work part-time on campus as a student. The earnings that you receive through that job do not count against your financial aid, which is incredible for students who have that opportunity. So I always encourage students to take advantage of that. We also have federal direct loans. So that encompasses direct subsidized loan, direct unsubsidized loan, and a Parent Plus loan, which I'll dive even more into in the next couple slides. And so I just want to highlight that educational loans are available to families and students at all income levels. It's just going to differ in the type of loan that we offer based on your financial income. All righty. So when we're looking at federal funding, the biggest federal program that we offer is the federal Pell Grant. And so this is funding that does not need to be repaid, again, assuming that a student is meeting their academic requirements. They've applied for financial aid specifically for the FAFSA. So because this is federal funding, this is only applicable to our FAFSA recipients. Now, this federal grant is awarded to undergraduate students who are working on their first bachelor's degree and meet the eligibility criteria set by the Department of Education. So a student will qualify for the maximum Pell Grant, and for this current academic year that we're in, so the 24-25, that figure is $7,395. Now, we just discussed a little bit about the SAI, and so this is where that value plays a big role in identifying the student's eligibility for the amount that they're eligible for. So for any student with an SAI of negative 1,500 to 0, so anywhere in between that a range, they're automatically going to be eligible for that maximum Pell Grant of $7,395. Now, if a student has a value of, or an SAI value that's above 0, doesn't mean that they're not eligible. We just have to calculate now what they are eligible for. And so that range is going to be anywhere between $740 up to that maximum Pell of $7,395. All right, when we're looking at state funding, the two biggest funding sources that we provide to students in the UC system is Cal Grant and Middle Class Scholarship. So the agency that oversees this is the California Student Aid Commission. So they're a state agency that oversees this funding. When we're looking at the Cal Grant, that pays for the full cost of tuition and service fees at any UC. So that's an incredible resource, right? And as we looked at the budget, that's the biggest cost that you're looking at, apart from housing, of course, depending on your housing situation. So if you have that fully covered, that's automatically going to start reducing that out-of-pocket cost for you. Now, there's no separate application, and for any of these funding sources that I'm discussing right now, all you have to do is apply for either your FAFSA or California Dream Act. There's no separate application, at least for the UC system. I do understand that in the private sector, they may have additional applications that they require for students. So just make sure that you're checking in with your respective institution about additional steps you may need to take with them. But again, for the UC system and UCLA, you just have to submit your FAFSA or California Dream Act to be considered for any of these funding sources. Now, again, with the Cal Grant, this is available for up to 4 years for incoming freshmen and 2 years for incoming transfer students. They do have to be consecutive years. So that means that if at any point you do take a break, you potentially may not be eligible for the remaining time frame of your Cal Grant eligibility. There might be some unique cases where they can put the funds on reserve, but that's something that you have to discuss directly with the California Student Aid Commission. Now, the middle class, on the other hand, middle class scholarship, this is for students from families with incomes and assets of up to $226,000 per year. They do have a very detailed breakdown of the income levels based on family and household size. So I do recommend looking into that through the California Student Aid Commission. I'm happy to share that at the very end as well. And this is specifically for California residents who have submitted their application on time. And the awards do vary because the middle class scholarship is calculated directly by the California Student Aid Commission. And so there's no exact figure or range that we can provide in terms of eligibility. Now, I do also want to highlight that the income and assets that I mentioned here of the $226,000 per year is specifically for dependent students. So again, if your student, let's say, for example, is considered independent, then they will have a different set of criteria to look at. All right, so just to highlight some of the scholarships and grants that we offer at UCLA specifically, we do provide university grant funding for both in-state and out-of-state students. I do want to highlight, though, that for our out-of-state students, we can only offer for up to 4 years as an incoming freshman and 2 years as a incoming transfer student. So that's really critical to keep in mind. We also offer a U-Ship grant, and that specifically covers the full cost of health insurance at UCLA. So for some students, they do have, let's say they have Cal Grant and the U-Ship grant, that's already going to minimize a huge chunk of that cost that we looked at. We also offer a parenting student grant, and this is one of our biggest resources that we offer to our parenting students with the new application in mind. Unfortunately, we aren't able to identify the student population as we used to in previous academic years. So if your students or you as a student are a parenting student with a child of under the age of 18, please reach out to your financial aid department. Again, I know I'm speaking on specifically UCLA, but your institution may have a resource very similar. And so typically the student would just need to provide a copy of the child's birth certificate and verification that they are financially supporting that child more than 50%. But that is an amazing resource that is offered for all 4 years or 2 years, depending on your entry as a freshman or transfer student. We also offer a Regent Scholarship, Alumni Scholarship, and of course, departmental funding. So each department may have their own funding source outside of our office that they can provide to their students as well. All right, so one of our newer initiatives that was recently implemented is the Native American Opportunity Plan, and this is across the entire UC system. So NAOP ensures that the system-wide tuition and service fees are fully covered for California students who are enrolled in a federally recognized Native American, American Indian, and Alaskan Native tribes. So students do not need to apply for this. This is something that they will self-identify on their UC application. So it is critical that you're answering those questions and providing the information at request. So we work directly with admissions to identify this population. We do request a copy of the student's tribal ID just to confirm that they do qualify based on the criteria. However, I do want to also highlight that because this is a tuition paying plan, that means that if the student, let's say, qualifies for Cal Grant, unfortunately, because they both pay the full cost of tuition and service fee, we cannot double dip. So state funding would take priority, so the student would have to receive the Cal Grant over the Native American Opportunity Plan. Let's say, however, in your second, third, or fourth year, you don't qualify for the Cal Grant anymore for whatever reason, maybe income was too high or whatever the case is, and you still meet the criteria for the Native American Opportunity Plan, then we can consider you for that funding source. Alrighty. Another opportunity plan that we offer is the Blue and Gold. And this, very similar to NAOP and the Cal Grant, fully covers the cost of tuition and service fee at any UC. And this is specifically for students with a family total income of $80,000 or less. And so, again, very similar to NAOP. Unfortunately, if the student is eligible for Cal Grant, that would take priority, and we would not be able to provide the Blue and Gold opportunity plan. But again, the same process applies where if you are no longer eligible for Cal Grant, but meet the criteria for any Blue and Gold, then we will then provide that funding source. All right, so understanding your loan options. I understand that not everyone is going to want to consider federal student loans, but I think it's really critical that you're aware of what's available to you. In some cases, students unfortunately have to tap into that resource because of maybe emergencies that happen and you're not able to work anymore. And so we want to ensure that you're aware of what those options are and how to navigate that. So with undergraduate student loans, we offer the federal direct subsidized loan and the federal direct unsubsidized loan. So this is specifically for FAFSA applicants. The great thing about these two loan options, should you have to consider them, is that they have a 6-month grace period. So that means that you do not have to begin repayment on any of those loans until 6 months after you graduate. Let's say you decide to pursue a master's program, a PhD, or just a professional program in general, then you're able to defer that even longer until after that program. Now, both of these currently have a fixed lifetime interest rate of 6.53%. I will be very transparent that it's slowly going up every year. So that means that the figures you see listed here are for current students enrolled. So next year or even the following year, depending on when you're planning to apply, that interest rate may be a little bit different. But once you actually take out that loan based on the year that you're in, whatever interest rate that they're giving you, it's going to stay the same for the entire time frame that it takes for you to pay back that loan. Now, the other two loan options that we provide to students is a university loan, and this is typically only for our incoming freshman students, and that's at an interest rate of about 5%. And then we also offer a Dream Loan for our California Dream Act applicants, and that specific loan is only up to $4,000 for the academic year. So that's per year up to 4 years. Now, another thing I want to highlight that I didn't indicate on here, just because I don't want to overwhelm you, because I know this is already a lot of information, is that there's origination fees. So that means, and this is across any college institution that provides federal loans or any form of institutional loan. There's always going to be a fee or a tax that is applied to the loan at the time of disbursement. And so I always encourage students to really sit down and figure out what they need to take out in a loan should they need to, and calculate that tax. So we at UCLA do have a PDF that's like a loan calculator that helps you determine what that fee is going to be, so you can ensure that you're taking out sufficient amount of that loan to cover whatever balance. And again, that's another resource I'll put in the chat after as well. Now, on the other hand, for dependent students, we also offer a Parent Plus loan. Again, this is also just for FAFSA applicants. So the Federal Direct Parent Plus loan is currently at a 9.08% lifetime interest rate. And so this one is application based, so the parent does have to apply and get approved because there is a credit check component. And so they just want to ensure that there's no adverse credit, no bankruptcies on file. And as long as they're approved, then they're able to take out that loan on the student's behalf. All right, so maintaining financial aid eligibility. This is really critical information that is applicable at any institution that you decide to pursue. So applying for financial aid is just the first step. The second step is ensuring that you're maintaining your academic eligibility in order to continue to qualify for financial aid. So just because you applied for the FAFSA or California Dream Act doesn't mean that we guarantee that we can offer you that funding. You also need to do your part to maintain that academic eligibility. And so the two components that we look at is your cumulative GPA. And so the requirement that we have is a 2.0. I honestly think that's very generous in the UC system because a lot of our institutions tend to be very research-based, and a lot of these majors require you to have well above a 2.0. But we also understand that a lot can happen, and so I'll discuss a little bit about should you ever fall into a place of not meeting one of the requirements, there are steps that you can take. The second component that we look at, apart from your GPA, is your PACE. And so PACE is basically when we're looking at how many units have you attempted at the university since you started, and out of those attempted units, how many have you actually completed? So we do require that students are meeting a 67% of completion. So just as an example, let's say they're reviewing my eligibility as a student. I've attempted maybe 60 units since I started at UCLA, but of those attempted units, I actually only completed and passed 30. At that point, I'm only at 50%, which is under that 67%, so I'm not meeting that requirement. And so when students aren't meeting one of the requirements or both, they are put on financial aid probation, or what we call SAP probation. And so at that point, a student is no longer eligible for financial aid unless they appeal and get approved. We do tend to be very lenient. Again, we understand a lot can happen in a quarter, whether it's, family, personal, or just educational, mental. Maybe you needed some time. Maybe the classes just really weren't working out for you. And so we do have an appeal process, and most institutions will as well. If you want to kind of get an idea of what that looks like, you can scan that QR code and it'll lead you to our appeal guide, as well as just more information about SAP. But again, you always want to consult with the financial aid department if you're ever unsure or have questions. And so that kind of leads into another area where we review students' eligibility on an annual and quarterly basis. So with UCLA, we do something that we call census, and that's at the end of every week 3 of every quarter. So that's fall, winter, and spring, or summer as well, if students are attending. Now, during that time, we are basically ensuring that students are enrolled full-time. So full-time is 12 units or more, or 12 credits. And so if students are not enrolled in 12 units, unfortunately, financial aid may be adjusted, which could result in a pretty significant bill. So we always encourage students to consult with the financial aid department if they're ever in a position where they're considering dropping a course, withdrawing from the quarter. We want to ensure that we're recommending your best kind of next steps based on your situation. We also do an annual check just to ensure that students, again, are meeting that academic requirement. And so that annual check is when we're looking at your cumulative GPA as well as your PACE. Alrighty, I know that was a lot of information. So if you have any questions, please feel free to jot those down so we can answer them at the end. All right, employment opportunities. I know starting college is already scary in itself, so adding in employment is even much more, right? But I cannot speak on how speak enough on how amazing employment during college is such an amazing opportunity. I myself started as a student staff in our financial aid department, and I have learned so much, and it allowed me to really understand how I could finance my education. And now I'm able to provide that information to students like yourself. So some of the work study programs that we offer is Federal Work Study, University Work Study, Jumpstart, America Reads, and Community Service. Again, the ones that I'm indicating here are very UCLA specific, but you always want to consult with your financial aid department at your institution because they may have very similar programs in place or partnerships. Other opportunities that are also offered are paid internships and research, especially if you're attending a research-based institution. There's definitely going to be opportunities there as well. For UCLA, we also have our Career Centers Handshake, which is very similar to like Indeed or LinkedIn kind of combined together. So there's work study based opportunities, but also non-work study based for students who maybe didn't qualify for that. And of course, you want to check within your community, whichever institution that you go to. You could be the one who kind of starts that new position with an organization and creating that partnership. So if there's something that maybe there's not a position already in place for what you want to pursue, don't be afraid to start that conversation and ask, because you could be the one who develops that position along with the organization that you're working with. All right, applying for scholarship opportunities. So here at UCLA, we do have a prospective student scholarship application. So if anyone is considering UCLA, actually now you could even apply for the scholarship application because it did open back on October 1st. Eventually, as you're an admitted student, we also have a registered student application, as I'm very sure majority of the UC colleges or institutions will also have very similar processes. We also have the Center for Scholarships and Scholar Enrichment. So that's our formerly known as our Scholarship Resource Center. And we have full-time staff who will sit down with you, research the best opportunities for you based on maybe your career trajectory or your identity as a first-gen student. So always consult with your scholarship department on campus. I myself, I feel that I could have done a better job when I was a student, but that's because I didn't know, right? And so now that you're hearing these, you want to jot that down to take a moment to kind of reach out and at least know where you can reach out to them. You also want to consult with your academic department, your college or school, because they may have their own funding sources that you can apply to. So always ensure that you're taking advantage of every single resource that you have. Outside of your campus, you also want to check with your community and, of course, reputable scholarship search tools such as College Board, CollegeNet, FastWeb, and scholarships.com. And the scholarship applications doesn't stop at just preparing for college, right? So I know right now, at least for seniors, you're probably spending a lot of time applying for scholarships. And so continue that. Once you're at an institution, it doesn't stop there. So keep in mind that a lot of these scholarship donors unfortunately limit it to 1 year. And so you want to ensure that you're going to have that consistency of scholarships while you're attending the university. So don't just stop at your senior year of high school. Continue that in your first year, your second year, and third year. All right. So now we're reaching towards the end. I know this has been a lot. So here at UCLA and a lot of institutions, if not all, hopefully, they tend to offer a net price calculator. So we understand that once you get your admission decisions, it's a lot to take in. And one of those biggest factors that you're looking at to consider making your decision is the cost. And so the net price calculator basically allows you to kind of estimate your aid. It's going to give you a breakdown of what your student aid index may be, your actual cost. But again, as a reminder, we broke down what the cost of attendance budget is, right? So don't get scared about that figure. Really take into mind about what your cost may actually be based on your situation. And so then based on that, you can kind of get an idea of what your gift eligibility would look like, as well as your actual net cost. And this is typically a resource you can use now as you're waiting to hear back about your admission decision, because when you get your admission decision, you're typically also getting your provisional aid letter of financial aid. So that's when they're kind of letting you know what you're actually eligible for funding sources. And so if you scan that QR code, that will lead you to UCLA or the UC system, actually, net price calculator, which will allow you to input your information to kind of just play with it, get an idea of what that cost would look like. All right, so with that, if you want to learn a little bit more, maybe you want some of these subjects or topics broken down a little bit more, we do offer short videos from 1 to 3 minutes long. So if you scan the QR code or visit our website, specifically ucla.financialaidtv.com, you can access all of those. It's open to the public. You don't have to be a student or a faculty or staff in order to access those. So I'll give that a second. Alrighty. And then I encourage you to engage with us. So I'm really trying hard to really kind of outreach to our students through social media. I know our current generation is really big on that, and it's one of the quickest ways for us to give you information in a short time frame, right? So maybe an important deadline came up, a new opportunity came up, which is time sensitive. So we do try to post all about that information, as well as our free workshops on various financial aid topics and more. So we're mostly prominent on on Facebook and Instagram. We do have a Twitter as well, which is just the same information that you're going to see on Instagram and Facebook as well. So I'll give that a second. All right. And then let's say you do have further questions. Again, you don't have to be a student or a current student to contact us, but we do have a few different methods. We have our messaging center, which is available through our website on our contact us page. We do have our phone service available Monday through Friday from 10 to 3, with the exception of course, of holidays. We are available in person. You do not have to be a current student. You do not need an appointment to speak with us. So we're available for drop-ins from 10 to 3, Monday through Friday as well. And then, of course, our financial aid website, which will have a lot of different information and publications that you can access, which are really great. And I don't say that just because my team and I oversee all that, but we really want to ensure that you know where you can look into if you have further questions about certain topics that I just discussed. Okay, let me talk about two important things then. So not just UCLA specific, but any institution. So when you're applying for FAFSA or California Dream Act, the tax information that you're reporting or directly getting pulled from the IRS is always going to be from 2 years prior. So a lot can happen, right? In a month, in a year. And so if you're ever in a situation where that income has significantly changed since the time frame that they're looking at, please consult with your financial aid department. Every institution is going to have some form of process where you can appeal to have your current income considered as opposed to that time frame. At UCLA, we call it the projected year income petition, which is accessible through our website. So just make sure to consult with your financial aid department if you're ever in that situation. The second thing that a lot of students don't tend to actually know is that you can potentially do a budget adjustment. So some institutions, or majority of them, we tend to offer certain, how would I phrase it? Like approved expenses that you can add on top of your budget. Let's say for housing, if you're paying above our standard rent component for an on-campus or off-campus student, we can do an adjustment to account for that different expense. I'll drop a lot of these links in the chat shortly, just so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm referring to. But just know that typically those adjustments are resulting in additional loan assistance, but it can be very beneficial if, let's say, you're receiving outside scholarships and you've kind of received maybe too much where it's exceeding your budget, then that's where these adjustments can kind of be beneficial for you. Okay, and I do see some chats. Okay, it looks like they were directly sent to me. So let's see. 12/1 is a Sunday, so is that when a federal site will be open? Is it a Sunday? Oh my. Oh, it is. Well, that's what Federal Student Aid said. So they're the ones who administer the FAFSA. I would think that they would open it because it's an online tool. So it's not like an application that you'll have to mail in. Of course, that is an option as well, but we don't really encourage that. But I would say as of now, they've told us December 1st, so I would go with that date. Okay, it looks like maybe some questions about international students. So thank you for mentioning that. So unfortunately, at least for UCLA specifically in the UC system, we don't tend to have funding for international students. And that's because they're not considered in-state residents or even out-of-state students that would be considered for any funding, unfortunately. For UCLA specifically, we do have a campus-based resource called the DASHU Center, and they tend to have scholarship opportunities that students can apply for. So, of course, based on the respective institution that your student is applying to, you would want to check to see if they have an international student center where they can provide that type of support.
Maria, I also have a question about study abroad. I went abroad multiple times as an undergraduate, so I'd just like to ask if you could share a bit more information about the UC system and how the financial aid office can support students and their
Of
experiences
course.
abroad.
Yeah, I myself actually studied abroad, so this is a great question. So basically, if you are studying abroad, we do an adjustment to your budget based on the term that you're going. So let's say you're going in the fall quarter. So we'll award you first as your regular academic year that you're attending the university. And then we adjust your budget specifically for the term that you're going to be abroad. So if it's for fall, for those 3 months, we're going to expand your budget to account for that higher cost. I will be very transparent that they are much more expensive than a regular term at the university. So just as an example, let's say the cost of the program was $30,000 for that quarter. We're going to ensure that we're providing sufficient funding to cover that. Now, it's not going to be fully in grants, unfortunately, depending on your situation, but I will say that a huge chunk of that funding source that we're providing is going to be in grant-based funding. So everything that you would have been eligible for the regular term at your campus will be applied to that, along with additional loan assistance to cover the difference in that expense.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course. Okay. So for the question about the FAFSA for a student who's maybe in grade 11, you can probably create the account, but I wouldn't suggest applying right now if you're not considering like even a community college or anything like that. I would wait till senior year to actually apply because that's where you're going to indicate the institution that you'd like that information sent to. Oh yes, okay. So let me share real quick, and I'm gonna email this to Corinne to share with everyone. So this is a template, just to kind of a pretty template because I love color coding. That kind of shows you like how to create your own college budget, right? So you'll indicate your monthly income, financial aid. You'll look at your expenses, right, for rent, utilities. Typically, if you're living on campus, you don't have to stress about utilities because it is accounting for all of those expenses along with your food. So you don't have to worry about groceries or anything like that. And then you have your expenses per month for your cost of your education. And so just to kind of show you that you can actually go in and adjust this, like let's say my tuition was actually 10,000. It's gonna, because of the equation inside this and all that, it's going to update it for you already. So I'll share this and you can kind of play with it. Just keep in mind that typically when you're receiving your financial aid, at least as an example for UCLA, we disperse it on a quarterly basis. So for instance, for fall, we're giving you 1/3 of your funding in advance for those 3 months. So when you're planning this, just be mindful of how it's set up because this is a monthly budget. So you kind of want to ensure that you're accounting for those 3 months in that quarter based on the financial aid that you're receiving. So that's just kind of an example. So I'll share that with everyone. Let me stop share and share one more here. Let me see. Okay, and then on our financial aid website, this one I can at least drop in the chat, and I did have a couple other links I wanted to share. On our website, if you go to publications, we do have a lot of different appeal forms that you can kind of just get an idea of what might be something you can do at any other institution. There's a lot of publications with a lot of information, FAA handbook that goes really into depth about all of the information that I discussed. So loans, grants, looks like it's a little short here or slow, sorry. Okay, in the meantime, let me try to get you these other links. Okay, another helpful link in case we do have any students who are mixed status in our chat. So that's maybe someone with a parent who is unfortunately undocumented. For financial aid purposes, it is a bit of a more difficult process. And so I want to ensure that you do have the support that you need for the application. So I'm just going to drop these in the chat, but I'll also email them to Corinne to share. This one, and then the net price calculator. So in case you missed that QR code, I'm going to drop that in the chat as well. Okay. I'll stop share because this is taking a while to load or just to kind of show the publications, but let me see if there was maybe any other question.
Thank you so much for sharing all these resources.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll send you an email with all of them.
Okay.
So I think, and then you're welcome to forward it. I'll probably put it like on a Word doc so you can just do it as an attachment because I know just copying and pasting the links might be a lot.
Okay, great. That sounds perfect. And again, this recording will also be available on our YouTube page. Thank you again, Maria, so much for just coming to join us today and share the wealth of information because I'm a current UCLA student, so a proud Bruin, and we just
Mhm.
want to ensure that students are aware of all of the benefits and resources, no matter which college or institution that they decide to attend.
Mhm.
Again, also for the importance of parents and families to understand the deadlines and requirements for these applications. So thank you so much for sharing all of
Absolutely.
that. I
Yeah.
do want to quickly promote our event for next Monday. We, in continuation with financial aid and scholarships, we will have a webinar next Monday at the same time, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern on scholarship funding strategies. It will be co-hosted by Seeds of Fortune. Kamaya Leonard will be speaking and sharing some different resources and tools and strategies for students to utilize as they begin seeking external scholarship and grants from their chosen institutions. So again, you can register for that event on our website. And also, in addition to that, I will also ask that everyone take a moment to fill out our quiz or a quick poll just for feedback on how we can improve or different subjects that you would like us to host in the future. Again, when it comes to applying for college, it's not just necessarily about the specific application portions with essays, financial aid, scholarships. We also want to expand that into different types of institutions, understanding campus resources, understanding mental wellness toolkits, and even the various differences in the types of four-year and even community colleges across, not just within the states, but across the country. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We look forward to hosting you in the near future. And again, my name is Corinne. I will put my email address in the chat in case you want to follow up. And I'll also put in the address for our events page. But with that, thank you so much. And I'll hang out a little bit in case anyone has questions. But thank you all so much. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.